This lecture is going to focus upon new criticism, and this is also called objective criticism, because there is nothing like subjective that can be discussed with reference to new criticism. Whereas this theory is concerned, it means that the very first thing with reference to a text is that the writer is the source of meaning. When writer is the source of meaning, that is called expressive realism. And when we think that writer is the source of meaning, at the same time, in order to interpret a piece of literature, we will have to keep in mind that we will have to understand the social background of that writer, political, moral, ethical, religious and economical background, the cultural background, and also what were the things, what were the happenings in the world which molded the personality of a writer, and then he tried to write this special piece of literature. And then also it means that his biography, his autobiography, his diaries, what he himself says about a piece of literature, all these things are a part of expressive realism, because writer is the source of meaning. When writer is the source of meaning, critics say that no meanings are going to be static, no dynamic meanings. Meanings are static, and there can be only a single interpretation of any piece of literature. And then this is called expressive realism, and this new criticism is going to challenge this expressive realism. New critics say that writer is not the source of meaning. Now, the second important thing is that can we say that a reader is the source of meaning? So this is called reader response criticism. A reader can never be a source of meaning according to this new criticism, because when reader is source of meaning, reader always interprets a piece of literature by keeping in mind his own background, his own feelings, his own way of thinking, his own cultural background, his personal emotions, each and everything that is at the background of his personality, he keeps in mind, and then he tries to interpret a piece of literature. When he interprets a piece of literature by keeping in mind his own personal life, new critics say that now he is going to ignore the text. When he is going to ignore the text, it means that reader is source of meaning. Now new criticism is also going to challenge this theory that's called reader response theory. It challenges expressive realism, and at the same time it also challenges reader response theory. But the most important thing is that reader is always there, because if text is the source of meaning, it is reader who is going to interpret this text. So according to new criticism or objective criticism, neither writer nor the reader is the source of meaning. Then what is the source of meaning? This text is the source of meaning. When text is the source of meaning, this criticism is called new criticism or objective criticism, because a reader is not going to be a subjective while interpreting a piece of literature. Then what is the thing that is very important in order to understand a piece of literature, and especially to understand a text? So whereas a work of literature is an independent thing, text says that a work of literature is an independent thing, it is not going to depend upon any other person or any other thing to get its interpretation. So it is an independent thing, it is an entity that is independent. Then how can we understand a text? Who is speaking in the text? Whereas new criticism is concerned, the very first important thing is that who is speaking in the text, and these critics say that text itself speaks in the text. Text itself speaks in the text, because text means universe, text means life, everything that's happening around us, that is a text. So text itself is, writer is not going to speak to us, it is text which is speaking to us. So this is the very first important thing with reference to new criticism. The second thing is who is being spoken to, who is the imagined addressee, imagined reader of the writer who has written a piece of literature. That when time changes and space changes, a reader changes. So this is also supposed to know that who is the addressee. Then who is implied reader of the text? Implied reader of the text means that whenever a writer writes any drama, novel, short story or poetry, there is always an implied reader, because he always writes for a reader. When he always writes for a reader, so there is always an imagined reader in his or her mind, so that's called implied reader. Then what is setting? Whereas setting is concerned, no drama, novel, short story or poetry is without setting. There must be a setting. Setting can be related to nature, it can be about city, it can be about village life, it can be about anything that is that is part of this universe, that can be a background. And what is the central metaphor of text? Central metaphor of the text means that what text actually wants to say originally, really what text wants to say. It is not that what writer wants to say or what reader wants to interpret. No, what is the metaphor of the text means that what is actually the text. So these are the questions which must be kept in mind in order to do something like justice with new criticism. Then, whereas in order to discuss, in order to know a piece of literature, you are going to have a thing that is called words on page or source of meaning. Now, most important thing, if we are to define this new criticism, that is close reading of a text. Close reading of a text means that words on page are source of meaning. Words on page are source of meaning. When words are there, it means that sentences are there, paragraphs are there, each and everything that is there, that is the source of meaning. We are not going to interpret by keeping in mind our own mental or social background or our own way of thinking. No, text is the source of meaning. Words on page are the source of meaning. When words on page are the source of meaning, there are different types of things which we have to understand, but the most important of them are, number one is there is a paradox. That this is the first thing that a reader must keep in mind, that is there any paradox? Paradox means that there can be two type of things which are anti to one another or each other. Suppose there is one idea and there is at the same time there is another idea, so that is called a paradox. If there is a paradox, the reader himself is not going to involve himself in that thing. He is just going to simplify that paradox and he can understand the meaning of that thing. Then there is tension. Tension means that this is a very thing that's related to conflict. Whereas conflicts are concerned, conflicts, a man or a character who is a part of that piece of literature, he can be in conflict with God, he can be in conflict with society, he can be in conflict with fate, he can be in conflict with nature, he can be in conflict with his family, he can be in conflict with this society, he can be in conflict with religion, he can be in conflict with the economic system, he can be in conflict with political system, he can be in conflict even with himself. It means that these are different types of tension which are part of that piece of literature, because there is no text in this world that is without conflicts. So these are the main different types of text which are a part of a text. So when a reader comes to know that these are the conflicts, these are the tensions, then he goes to the next step, that is that he is going to solve those conflicts, and then he can also come to know that what are the reasons which are involved in these conflicts and how this text itself is going to resolve those texts, because this tension tells us that what is the actual purpose of that text. Then there is an ambiguity. Ambiguity means that there are images, because human beings always think in images, and when we are going through any piece of literature, there are different types of images which are passing through our mind, and when the character change, when a setting changes, when plot changes, when its beginning, middle and end changes, when everything is going to change, it means that there is going to be ambiguity and there are images, and as many there are images, so are the interpretations, and there can be multiple meanings of a text. Text is with multiple interpretations, there is not a single interpretation of that. Then third thing is organic unity. Organic unity means that there is there a proper beginning, middle and end, there is coherence between and among all the characters, there is coherence between and among all the parts of a piece of literature, there are stylistic devices are used in a very beautiful manner, they are embellished in a very good manner, and this is called organic unity. That whether this piece of literature is full-fledged piece of literature or there are certain drawbacks, because organic unity is a thing which tells us that what is actually a piece of literature. Then there is a thing that's called affective fallacy, and then intentional fallacy. Whereas in intentional fallacy is concerned, because this is a fact that we can never understand the real intentions of a writer when he was writing a drama, a novel, a short story, an essay, or anything like that. Because at that time, while he was writing a piece of literature, what were his real intentions, the stage of mind from which he was passing, what were his intentions, what type of backgrounds he was having. So all these things lie with the writer, and we can never know the actual intentions of the writer. If someone says that we can understand the intentions of the writer, so that is a fallacy, and that is called intentional fallacy. So this is also a thing which is away from new criticism. Then there is affective fallacy. Affective fallacy means that a piece of literature has meanings because there is a reader. Now again, reader is a thing which is a very much informed reader. He interprets a piece of literature by keeping in mind his own feelings, emotions, thinking pattern, his culture, his social background, his moral, ethical background. So there are so many things which are at his or her background because he is a reader. And if a reader can interpret, or if he interprets, this is again called affective fallacy. So this thing is also away from new criticism because here only text, and text is the source of meaning. Then there is the thing that's called concrete universal. Concrete universal means that every piece of literature, that is not limited one. That piece of literature going to have meanings for each and every person in the world. So all the things, all the ideas, all ideologies, all the things, all which are all the philosophies of life, whether they are from any part of life, they have universal appeal. They have concrete universal because they can be accepted here, there, and everywhere, because a piece of literature is not a thing that is written for any one person. Because when a writer writes something, with the passage of time, a time comes when the writer is no more in this world. When he is no more in this world, it means that now this text is an autonomous body, and when it is an autonomous entity, now there is no writer, we cannot understand, because time has changed, society has changed, culture has changed, political systems have changed, social systems have changed, economic systems have changed. When time have changed, it means no space have changed. When space have changed, readers change. So when readers change, it means that there are the meanings which are universal, and they are part of that piece text, and they can be understood by all of them. Then the next most important thing is that who were the critics who were responsible for this new criticism. So the very first person is T.S. Eliot, and especially his theory of impersonality of poetry. And whereas new criticism is concerned, it's mostly concerned with poetry and its interpretation. So T.S. Eliot, he was of the view that a poet who is subjective in poetry, it means that when he is writing subjectively, he is an immature poet. So how he can be called a mature poet? T.S. Eliot says that with the passage of time, a time comes when that writer becomes mature, because now he is going to be more and more impersonal. He is just going to take things from society, to take ideas from society, and he is going to write a thing. And then a piece of literature that is which is called a poem. Now poem is not something subjective according to T.S. Eliot. Poem is a thing that is a thing which is objective. That is not something related with our subjective feeling. So this is his theory of impersonality of poetry. The writer is just playing the role of a catalyst. That he is just a catalyst, and he is going to compose a thing. So a poem is an entity that is not depending upon the writer or the poet. So when you are going to interpret it, now again you will have to keep in mind that we are to interpret by keeping in mind the words on page. Then the second one, the most important figure is I.A. Richard. He was a professor. Usually it was his practice that whenever there were students in his class, he used to hand over them different types of poems, and then he used to say them that write down whatever comes to their minds after reading the poem. and usually there were not the mentioning of the name of the poems or the names of the poets. When they were not mentioned, it means that a reader can never know that what is the background of this piece of literature, who is the writer, and what were the trends, what were the movements which are responsible for that. So then what is the thing that is rest for that writer? So that is the only thing that is called words on page or poem that is left there. So I just say that when this type of practice was done, there were poem was just one, and there were countless multiple interpretations, because there are different students, so there were different interpretations. And this is also called ambiguity, because there are images and different minds are there, different types of backgrounds they have having, so they are going to interpret, and they always interpret a piece of literature by keeping in mind those images, and the result is ambiguity, that there are multiple meanings of that. Then there is William Emerson, and whereas his concepts are concerned, he also followed I.A. Richard, and they are related with practical criticism, and means that words on page, close reading of the text. And he is also referred with reference to 7 types of ambiguities. So those ambiguities also a part of a piece of literature, piece of a poem or piece of text. So he was also of the view that words on page like I.A. Richard must be the source of meaning. Then there is Arthur Lewis. He discarded old method of interpreting a poem. Old method was that there must be summary, there must be the theme, that writer is telling us this is this and that, then their teachers are telling us this and that. It means that there is something new. No, again, there is something new. You mean that this is a new method of concentrating upon a poem, that poem itself is something which is telling you, so you must understand it. Then there is Ransom. So according to him, a poem is a concrete entity. Poem is an entity. Poem is not depending upon something. Poem is an independent entity. Poem is containing each and everything that is part of that thing. So when it is itself an entity, it means that its meanings can also be in that very poem. So these are the critics who are responsible for this new criticism. And then whereas the things which are usually observed in a poem, they are, for example, images. Now this is very much important. Images mean that in a poetry most of the time there are images, different type of imagery. It can be natural imagery, it can be animal related imagery, it can be from these parts of nature, it can be about seas, it can be about oceans, it can be about mountains. So this is type of imagery which is used. And then there are symbols. So symbols are the things which help us in knowing multiple meanings, different types of symbols. When different types of writers, they use different types of symbols. So symbols also tell us different types of meanings. And most of the time all these things are related with organic unity. And these things tells us that there is something special in that poem. Then there is hero, because there can be in a drama, novel, short story, there can be hero, and then there is anti-hero. Hero means a person around whom all the story revolves. He is the central figure. Then there is anti-hero, mean that a person who is against that. Then embellishment. Embellishment means stylistic devices, different types of devices which are used there. Then simile, metaphor, and word selection, because when a poem changes, word selection changes, and when as time changes, then also word selection changes, and then the arrangement of words into different types of sentences can be long, sentences can be short. Then characters, different type of characters. Characters can be flat characters, they can be dynamic, they can be static characters, there can be different type of characters. Then rhyme, rhythm, meter, especially with reference to poetry. And then point of view, that this narration is first person narration, second person narration, or third person narration. And then irony is there, that there is something difference between appearance and reality, that's irony. Then setting, characterization, plot, style, and sarcasm. And there are all those things which are part of which are called figures of speech. They are part of this new criticism, because because the words on page whatever they are, whoever is the writer, whenever they are written, words on a page are the source of meaning. So according to new criticism, writer is not the source of meaning, reader is also not the source of meaning. So what thing remain, that is called text and only text. And whereas this text is concerned, there is a lot of discussion about that, what is text. Now at a lower level, a drama is a text, a short story is a text, a novel is a text, a piece of literature is a text, a poetry is a text. Then when we increase its level, it means that every man in this universe is a text, every institution is a text, all political systems are text, all religious systems are text, all those social systems, all cultures are text, when all economical systems are text. It means that everything in this universe is a text. When everything in this universe is a text, it means that this universe itself is a text. And then this universe is a text, the world is a text, so this life is a text. And we have to understand the meanings of life. How meanings of life? That what actually this text say. Who is the creator? That's not source of meaning. Who is the receiver of meaning? He is also not source of meaning. Text itself will tell us that what is the meaning of life. And this new criticism also a form of formalism. And this is first thing that's called new criticism. And there is another thing that's called Russian formalism. So there is a little bit difference between these two terms. But new criticism is related with text and only text.